Epictetus, a Greek philosopher who had been dead for 1,800 years, a former slave whose leg was broken by his master. And somehow, this ancient, crippled slave would become the reason Stockdale survived when so many others did not. The men who died were not the weak ones. They were the optimists, the ones who said we will be out by Christmas. And Christmas would come and go, then Easter, then Thanksgiving, then Christmas again. They died of broken hearts. But Stockdale walked out after 7 years, claiming he would not trade the experience. What did he know that they did not? Welcome to the Stoic path, where ancient wisdom becomes modern warfare and the mind becomes your ultimate weapon. Today, I'm going to show you the 5 Stoic disciplines that made Stockdale unbreakable. The same disciplines that allowed Marcus Aurelius to rule an empire while plague killed 2,000 Romans a day. The same disciplines that let Epictetus become freer as a slave than his master ever was. These are not philosophical concepts. They are psychological weapons. And modern neuroscience now confirms exactly why they work. By the end of this video, you will have the complete operating system for mental dominance that has been battle-tested for over 2,000 years. To understand why these disciplines work, you need to understand who created them. Stoicism was not invented by comfortable academics in safe libraries. It was forged in the heat of real adversity by men who had lost everything. Epictetus was born a slave. His name is not even his real name. Epictetus means acquired in Greek, a reference to his slave status. His real name is lost to history. According to the ancient sources, his master punished him by deliberately twisting his leg until it broke. When the leg snapped, Epictetus simply said, "I told you so." He later taught that lameness is a hindrance to the leg, but not to your ability to choose. Seneca was one of the wealthiest men in Rome. Then he was exiled to the barren island of Corsica for 8 years on false charges, just weeks after his infant son died. He returned to become advisor to Emperor Nero, watching as Nero murdered his own mother, his brother, his wife. Seneca lived knowing his life was perpetually at risk from a man who had killed his own family. When Nero finally ordered his death in 65 AD, Seneca received the sentence quite unmoved. He opened his veins, drank hemlock like Socrates, and dictated philosophical observations to scribes throughout the process. Marcus Aurelius inherited an empire that was literally on fire. The Antonine Plague killed an estimated 5 to 10 million people, 7 to 10% of the entire empire. At its peak, 2,000 died daily in Rome alone. Simultaneously, he commanded 140,000 men along the Danube frontier in desperate defensive wars against Germanic tribes. Only 2 of his 14 children survived to adulthood. His trusted general declared himself emperor. Marcus wrote his meditations not in a palace, but in military camps, by lamplight, while his world collapsed around him. These were not theorists, they were survivors, and they built a system. The first discipline is what Epictetus called the dichotomy of control. The opening line of his Enchiridion establishes everything. Some things are within our power and others are not. Things in our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and in a word, whatever are our own actions. Things not in our control are body, property, reputation, command, and in one word, whatever are not our own actions. The key Greek term is prohairesis, our faculty of rational choice that cannot be conquered. Epictetus declared, "You will shackle my leg, but not even Zeus can conquer my will." Marcus Aurelius distilled this into combat-ready instruction. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Here's what modern psychology discovered. In 1954, Julian Rotter developed the concept of locus of control. People with internal locus of control, those who believe outcomes stem from their own actions, show 30% lower odds of clinical anxiety and depression during crisis periods. A 2023 study during the pandemic confirmed this protective effect across thousands of participants. The neuroscience is even more striking. When people perceive control over stressors, brain scans show decreased activation in the amygdala, the threat detection center, and increased activity in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex literally inhibits the stress response. Uncontrollable stress does the opposite. It impairs prefrontal function and shifts control to primitive brain circuits. The Stoics discovered through practice what neuroscience now confirms through imaging. Focus only on what you control, and you build the neural architecture of invincibility. The second discipline is Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of evils. Seneca's letters provide the instructions. Rehearse them in your mind, he wrote. Exile, torture, war, shipwreck. If we do not want to be overwhelmed and struck numb by rare events as if they were unprecedented, fortune needs envisaging in a thoroughly comprehensive way. His principle was simple. If an evil has been pondered beforehand, the blow is gentle when it comes. Marcus Aurelius made this a morning ritual. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. This sounds like pessimism. It is the opposite. In 1985, Donald Meichenbaum developed stress inoculation training based on this exact principle. Like a vaccine, exposure to small amounts of stress builds psychological antibodies. Meta-analyses confirm it reduces anxiety and enhances performance under pressure. But here is the neuroscience that changes everything. A landmark 2018 study published in Neuron found that imagined extinction and real extinction were equally effective in reducing threat-related neural responses. When you mentally rehearse feared scenarios, your brain cannot distinguish between imagination and reality. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex activates, the amygdala calms, and the emotional charge of the feared event diminishes. The ancient Stoics discovered what modern brain science now proves. Rehearsing catastrophe before it arrives disarms it. The third discipline is the inner citadel. Marcus Aurelius wrote about it in Meditation's book 8. Remember that when it withdraws into itself and finds contentment there, the mind is invulnerable. The mind without passions is a fortress. No place is more secure. Once we take refuge, there we are safe forever. In book 4, he describes the retreat inward. People try to get away from it all, to the country, to the beach, to the mountains. You always wish that you could too, which is idiotic. You can get away from it anytime you like, by going within. Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul. The citadel is not a place, it is a practice. Between every stimulus and your response, there is a space. In that space lies your power. The insult arrives. You can choose to be wounded, or you can choose to observe it like weather passing. The failure arrives. You can choose to spiral, or you can choose to extract the lesson and move forward. But the fortress requires constant construction. Epictetus explained how citadels fall, not by the sword, not by fire, but by opinion. The critical insight appears in chapter 5 of the Enchiridion. Men are disturbed not by things, but by the principles and notions which they form concerning things. This single sentence became the foundation of modern psychotherapy. Albert Ellis, founder of rational emotive behavior therapy in 1956, stated, "I am happy to say that in the 1950s, I managed to bring Epictetus out of near obscurity and make him famous all over again." Aaron Beck opened his foundational cognitive therapy text, acknowledging that the philosophical underpinnings go back thousands of years, certainly to the time of the Stoics. Viktor Frankl discovered the same truth in a concentration camp. "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing," he wrote. "The last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." Neuroimaging confirms the biological reality. When people reframe their interpretation of events, brain scans show increased activation in the prefrontal cortex combined with decreased activation in the amygdala. The prefrontal cortex regulates the amygdala through top-down control. Successful emotional regulators show stronger connections between these regions. They have built the neural architecture of the inner citadel. The fourth discipline is Amor Fati, the love of fate. Epictetus prescribed it directly. Do not seek for things to happen the way you want them to. Rather, wish that what happens happen the way it happens. Then you will be happy. Marcus Aurelius expressed this with striking intensity. "All that is in accord with you is in accord with me, O world. Nothing which occurs at the right time for you comes too soon or too late for me. Love only what befalls you and is spun for you by fate. No greater harmony. This goes beyond acceptance. It demands transformation." Seneca framed adversity as training from a divine coach. "You are unfortunate in my judgment, for you have never been unfortunate. You have passed through life with no antagonist. No one will know what you were capable of, not even yourself. Fire tests gold," he wrote. "Misfortune tests brave men." His famous maxim captures the strategic choice. The fates lead the willing and drag the unwilling. You do not choose whether circumstances happen. You choose whether you are led or dragged. Nietzsche later called this the formula for human greatness, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. Not merely bear what is necessary, but love it. Here is the psychology. Resistance creates suffering. When something happens and you fight it mentally, you are not fighting the event. The event has already happened. You are fighting reality, and reality always wins. But when you embrace what happens, when you say yes to the obstacle, something strange occurs. The obstacle transforms. It becomes material for growth. It becomes opportunity for virtue. It becomes the path itself. Modern psychology has operationalized this through acceptance and commitment therapy. Over 1,000 randomized controlled trials have now been conducted. The critical finding is what researchers call the desynchrony effect. Acceptance interventions increase persistence in distressing tasks, even without reducing distress. You can feel terrible and still act effectively. The Stoics knew this. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is action despite fear. Marcia Linehan developed the concept of radical acceptance. Her formula is precise. Pain is pain. Suffering agony Our pain plus non-acceptance. The pain is unavoidable. The suffering is optional. Post-traumatic growth research documents that 50 to 66% of trauma survivors experience positive psychological change, greater appreciation of life, improved relationships, recognition of new possibilities, greater sense of personal strength. The key finding is that the greater the distress, the greater the growth, but only in those who accept rather than resist their experience. Resistance blocks growth, acceptance enables it. The fifth discipline is Memento Mori, the meditation on death. Seneca wrote, "Think on death." In saying this, he bids us think on freedom. He who has learned to die has unlearned slavery. He is above any external power. Marcus Aurelius made this operational. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life. Now take what is left and live it properly. The Latin phrase originated in Roman triumphs. A slave stood behind victorious generals whispering, "Remember, you must die." Terror management theory, developed by modern psychologists, demonstrates that awareness of mortality creates existential anxiety that humans manage through psychological defenses. But here is the counterintuitive finding. Death acceptance, not death denial, produces the positive effects. Research shows that death reflection paradoxically reduces anxiety while increasing gratitude, present moment awareness, and prosocial behavior. A Florida State University study found people who walked through a cemetery were 40% more likely to help a stranger than those who walked a block away. When you stop fearing death, you stop fearing anything. Now look at your own life. Think about the last time something unexpected destroyed your week. A deal falling through, a relationship ending, someone betraying your trust, a project failing. How much of your suffering came from the event itself, and how much came from the shock, from the gap between what you expected and what happened? The Stoics would tell you that you should have been prepared. James Stockdale applied these 5 disciplines for 7 years in a prison cell. He was tortured over 20 times. He spent more than 4 years in solitary confinement, 2 years in leg irons. When his leg was shattered upon capture, leaving him permanently crippled, he drew direct parallel to Epictetus. The slave philosopher had survived the same injury. Stockdale used the dichotomy of control as the foundation of resistance. The only good and evil that means anything, he said, is right in your own heart, within your will, within your power, where it is up to you. He could not control whether he was tortured. He could control whether he betrayed his fellow prisoners. He could not control his release date. He could control his integrity. He practiced Premeditatio Malorum by never expecting release. When researcher Jim Collins asked who did not make it out, Stockdale replied, the Optimists. They set dates. They expected Christmas. The gap between their expectations and reality killed them. Stockdale expected nothing, so reality could never disappoint him. He built an inner citadel by refusing to grant access to his mind. Torture could reach his body. It could not reach his prohoresis, his faculty of choice. He cut his own face to avoid being used in propaganda. He attempted suicide the night before scheduled torture to protect fellow prisoners. His body was their prisoner. His will was not. He practiced Amor Fati by transforming captivity into meaning. He later claimed he would not trade the experience for anything, not despite the suffering, because of it. The obstacle had become his path, and Memento Mori was not abstract for him. Death was present every day. It clarified everything. When you have accepted the final loss, what lesser loss can touch you? That difficult person at work? A Stoic would have imagined them being difficult before they were. The market crash? A Stoic would have pre-experienced that loss monthly. The betrayal? A Stoic trusts people but never forgets they are capable of betrayal. Here is what separates the Unshakable from everyone else. Your emotional reactions are being used against you every day. Advertisers trigger your fear, so you buy things you do not need. Politicians trigger your anger, so you vote the way they want. Social media platforms trigger your outrage, so you keep scrolling. Everyone wants a piece of your psychological stability. The Stoics saw this 2,000 years ago, and they built a defense system. When you master the dichotomy of control, you stop wasting energy on what you cannot influence. When you practice Premeditatio Malorum, you rob catastrophe of its power to surprise you. When you build your inner citadel, no external event can breach your walls without your permission. When you embrace Amor Fati, you stop fighting reality and start using it. When you remember death, you stop fearing anything lesser. This is why Marcus Aurelius could rule an empire while it burned. This is why Epictetus could be a slave, yet freer than his master. This is why Seneca could face execution and use the time to dictate philosophy. This is why Stockdale could survive 7 years of torture and call it the defining experience of his life. They were not superhuman. They were practitioners. They trained. The Stoics did not practice philosophy to feel better. They practiced it to become dangerous. Dangerous to anyone who thought they could control them through fear. Dangerous to circumstances that thought they could break them. dangerous to the chaos that destroys ordinary minds. 2,000 years later, the world is more chaotic than ever. More triggers, more manipulation, more forces trying to hijack your emotional state. But the manual is still here. The techniques still work. The path is still open. The men who created this system paid for it with exile, slavery, plague, and death. They tested it under conditions that would shatter most people, and they left it for you. The obstacle is the way. Now you know how to walk it. If this shifted something in how you see adversity, subscribe. The Stoics left us a complete manual for psychological dominance. I will show you how to read it